It has come to my attention that people like lists for some reason, so I'm going to take a crack at it. In this video, I'd like to explore 5 polarizing progressive rock albums. But let me make a disclaimer before we get started. These albums aren't necessarily bad. In fact, I honestly like all of them, more or less, but they might have divided critics, or even worse, their listeners. These albums are not in any particular order, so let's get started. First up, And Then There Were Three by Genesis. Founding member Peter Gabriel had performed his final gig with Genesis at Saint Etienne, France in May of 1975. In October of 1977, the band saw the departure of their guitarist Steve Hackett due to some resistance to his rising solo career. The title And Then There Were Three started out as a joke with the music press. Now Phil Collins had assumed the role of lead singer, Mike Rutherford was picking up all guitar duties in the studio, and Tony Banks remained on the keys. Released in March of 1978, And Then There Were Three was admittedly not the strongest album Genesis had released, but it still reached number 3 on the UK charts and number 14 in the US. Banks even admitted to Prog magazine it would have been an even stronger album had Steve Hackett remained in the band. There are still very solid prog songs on the album, including Burning Rope and The Lady Lies. Where Genesis's prog rock fans started to feel alienated was with the album closer Follow You, Follow Me. This was clearly a pop song, and it was released as a single, even reaching the top 10 in the US. Tony Banks also had said that if Follow You, Follow Me had never been released, most people would never have heard of the group. This in turn gave the band a new direction, and worldwide success was on the horizon. The problem was the followers of their earlier works were being left behind. There is one question that I want to throw out there. Who had more of an effect on the sound of Genesis? Was it Peter Gabriel or Steve Hackett? Think about how much the sound had changed after each had left the band. To me, they stayed the course after Gabriel left, but took a left turn when Steve Hackett left the group and moved on. Let me know what you think in the comments section below. Next on the list is Caress of Steel by Rush. Rush had a semi-hit single with the title track of their second album, Fly By Night. However, it was another track on the album Rush wanted to build off of called By Tor and the Snow Dog, which was not only the longest song on the album, but it was also broken up into different parts. The follow-up album, Caress of Steel, was released in September of 1975. Bastille Day kicked off the album in typical Rush fashion, followed by the more humorous boogie rocker, I Think I'm Going Bald. Well, humorous to some. The last of the short songs was Neil Peart's laid-back nostalgia trip, Lakeside Park. The rest of side 1 was filled up by The Necromancer, a 3-part 12-minute concept song. Side 2 was completely dominated by an even longer epic, The Fountain of Lamnith, with 6 parts and clocking in at almost 20 minutes. Perhaps the public wasn't ready for a sidelong heavy metal meets progressive rock song with a dark theme. Hoping to keep the trend going where a successive album outsold its predecessor, Rush saw a dip in their sales curve. They even referred to their promotional tour of the album as the Down the Tubes tour because there were fears that they could be nearing the end. Even the album cover by Hugh Syme didn't go as planned. The album was supposed to have a silver color to illustrate the steel part of the title, but it ended up being printed in a copper color instead. I'm sure the band considered renaming the album Fondle of Copper as a result of this. In fact, it is not uncommon for an experimental prog rock band to go through some growing pains. Instead of abandoning sidelong concept songs, Rush doubled down on the release of their successful 2112 album the following year. Caress of Steel is a little more palatable if thought of as a stepping stone. Third on my list is Works Volume 1 by Emerson, Lake and Palmer. After completing a tour for their 5th album, Brain Salad Surgery, and releasing the live album, Welcome Back My Friends to the Show That Never Ends, Ladies and Gentlemen in 1974, it was time for Emerson, Lake and Palmer to take a much-needed hiatus considering they went non-stop for 5 years. They were out of the limelight for 2.5 years, and during this time, disco and punk were taking over the music scene. In 1976, they reconvened in the studio to release the 4-sided album Works Volume 1 in 1977. The only caveat was that each member got their own side of an album and they would collaborate on side 4. This was a result of the band's original plans to produce 3 solo albums. The idea was reconsidered for fears of stepping on each other's record sales, and this was an opportunity to show unity with diversity, or so they thought. I actually have an exclusive look as to what these solo album covers would have looked like had they been released. Obviously, each band member played to their strength. Keyboardist Keith Emerson commandeered side 1, since his name was the first in the band. Not having the sides in order of Emerson, Lake and Palmer would have certainly confused the listeners. Anyways, Emerson wrote Piano Concerto No. 1. This took up the entire side in 3 movements. Greg Lake contributed shorter songs with the word love showing up all over his 5 contributions, so you get the idea. Drummer Carl Palmer contributed 6 songs on the 3rd side with nods to funk, classical, and big band style jazz rock. This included a remake of Tank from ELP's debut album. Joe Walsh even showed up to play guitar on the song LA Nights for all you diehard Eagles fans out there who regretfully stumbled upon my YouTube channel. After listening to a band literally coming apart at the seams with 3 half-solo albums, the band shined on the 4th side with the universally loved cover of Aaron Copland's Fanfare for the Common Man and the orchestrated Pirates. This proves that the whole is greater than the sum of its parts. Well, until Love Beach was released. There was nothing polarizing about that album. Next up is a passion play by Jethro Tall. Thick as a Brick was released on March 10th of 1972. A tongue-in-cheek concept album with 45 minutes of continuous music managed to peak at number 5 in the UK and number 1 in the US. If doing a concept album is what the people want, then doing another must be a good idea. The follow-up to Thick as a Brick was originally planned to be a 4-sided album. The band began recording at Chateau d'Orville Studios outside of Paris, France. The experience was such a disaster that Jethro Tull abandoned the project after recording 3 of the 4 sides. Later, the sessions were dubbed by lead singer, songwriter, and flautist Ann Anderson as the Chateau Disaster Sessions. However, some of the music did make it onto A Passion Play and the follow-up War Child. Quite honestly, the music was actually good, and these sessions were released many years later as part of their Nightcap compilation. Jethro Tull did reconvene and finally released A Passion Play in July of 1973. The concept was about a recently deceased young man named Ronnie Pilgrim navigating through the afterlife. The beginning of side 2 started with an interlude featuring a story about a hare who lost his spectacles, appropriately called The Story of the Hare Who Lost His Spectacles. It may not be a surprise that sales of the album were half of that of Thick as a Brick. However, it still reached number 1 in the US. Critics were brutal and used words like tiresome, pretentious, and even nonsense. Their manager Terry Ellis poured salt on the wounds of the band when he told Melody Maker that Tull was essentially done. This was possibly just to make headlines in the rock press. Tull made headlines again 2 weeks later when Ellis claimed the band conveniently reformed. This was all a surprise to the band. Ian Anderson's account was that the band broke up on Friday and were back together the following Monday after breakfast. Either way, A Passion Play has aged very well and is definitely a favorite of mine. So what was next for Jethro Tull? Well, shorter, more accessible songs on the War Child album, and a return to critical favor. Before I get to my last Polarizing album, I wanted to do one honorable mention, which is Pawn Hearts by Vandergraaf Generator. I won't spend too much time on Pawn Hearts because I've already done an entire video on that album. In short, Pawn Hearts was Vandergraaf Generator's 1971 landmark album, but the problem was it did not sell nearly as well as expected, and it didn't even crack the top 100 in the UK charts. This ultimately led to a strained relationship with their record company, Charisma, and caused the band to take a 3-year hiatus. Once again, the album has aged very well and has become one of the top progressive rock albums of all time. Last on my list is Tales from Topographic Oceans by Yes. To say Close to the Edge is one of the greatest progressive rock albums of all time is probably an understatement. In most cases, it is known as the greatest progressive rock album of all time and features Yes's first foray into sidelong songs with the title track. So what do you follow that up with? 4 sidelong songs based on Paramahansa's Yogananda's Shastric scriptures. The album received gold status from advance orders alone, and why not after the success of the album's predecessor? Unfortunately, not only did the album leave listeners confused, but it also alienated keyboardist Rick Wakeman. In the band's attempt to explore Hindu mysticism, they seem to have given their previous melodic tendencies a back seat. The band started their tour by playing all 4 sides live, but because of mixed reactions, they began dropping whole sides of the album from their set list. Wakeman, having a successful solo career, decided it was time to leave Yes. He was replaced by keyboard wizard and former member of Refugee, Patrick Moraz, for the follow-up Relayer, which returned to the successful formula of Close to the Edge. I would like to explore Tales from Topographic Oceans in a future video. I am sure there are many more polarizing progressive rock albums out there. Let me know which albums I missed in the comments section below. I just wanted to start the conversation. If you have enjoyed what you have watched, then please give this video a like and subscribe. If you didn't like it, then you can exercise your freedoms and give it a dislike. Thank you for watching.